The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Kensington Palace as Princess Charlotte walked down the marble corridors with her usual grace. At 8 years old, she carried herself with a dignity that surprised even the most experienced palace staff. Her dark hair was neatly braided, and her school uniform was perfectly pressed, but there was something different about her today. A determination sparkled in her young eyes that hadn't been there the day before. The events that would unfold this Tuesday morning began 3 days earlier when Charlotte overheard a heated conversation between her parents in the drawing room. She had been practicing piano in the adjacent music room when raised voices caught her attention. Through the slightly open door, she heard her father, Prince William, discussing security concerns with her mother, Catherine. "The threats have increased," William said, his voice tight with worry. "The security team wants to double the guard presence around the children, especially Charlotte. She's becoming more visible in public appearances." Catherine's response was measured but firm. "She's just a child, William. We can't turn her life into a fortress. She needs to feel normal, to have some freedom." Charlotte pressed closer to the door, her small hands gripping the door frame. She had always known her life was different from other children, but hearing about threats made her stomach twist with anxiety. Yet something else stirred within her, a fierce protectiveness for the life she wanted to live and the people she cared about. The next morning, Charlotte noticed the changes immediately. 2 additional security officers flanked the usual guard as she walked to the car for school. Their presence felt suffocating, and she caught the worried glances they exchanged when she tried to wave at the small crowd of well-wishers gathered outside the palace gates. At school, the situation became even more uncomfortable. The new guards positioned themselves closer to her classroom, and during lunch break they insisted on staying within arm's reach. Charlotte's friends began asking questions she couldn't answer, and she felt the weight of being different more heavily than ever before. That evening, Charlotte made a decision that would surprise everyone around her. She asked her personal protection officer, James, if she could speak with him privately. James, a kind man in his 40s who had been protecting the royal family for over a decade, was taken aback by the serious expression on the young princess's face. "James," Charlotte said, sitting straight in her chair like she had seen her grandmother do during official meetings, "I want to understand what's happening. Why are there so many guards now? And why does everyone look so worried?" James hesitated, unsure how much he should reveal to a child. But something in Charlotte's steady gaze told him she deserved honesty. "There have been some concerning messages, Your Royal Highness. People who might want to cause trouble. We're just being extra careful to keep you safe." Charlotte nodded thoughtfully. "But being safe doesn't mean being scared, does it? My great-grandmother always said that showing fear gives power to those who want to frighten us." The wisdom in her words, spoken with such clarity by someone so young, made James realize that Princess Charlotte was far more perceptive than anyone had given her credit for. She wasn't just a child who needed protection. She was a young person trying to understand her place in a complex world. That night, Charlotte lay in bed thinking about her conversation with James and everything she had observed over the past few days. She thought about her great-grandmother's stories of courage during difficult times, about her grandfather's quiet strength, and about her parents' constant balance between duty and family life. As she drifted off to sleep, Charlotte made a quiet promise to herself. Tomorrow she would find a way to show everyone, the guards, her parents, and even those who wished her family harm, that she would not be intimidated. She would not hide behind walls of security or live in fear. She would stand firm, just as generations of her family had done before her. But she would do it in her own way. The following morning brought unexpected chaos to the usually orderly palace routine. Charlotte woke to the sound of urgent voices in the corridor outside her room. She quickly dressed and opened her door to find her mother deep in conversation with the head of security. "Commander Davies, the situation has escalated overnight," Davies was saying, his usually calm demeanor showing cracks of concern. "We received intelligence about a planned demonstration outside the palace during the princess's departure for school. Nothing violent is expected, but the crowd will be larger than usual." Catherine's face was pale but resolute. "What are you recommending?" "We suggest keeping Princess Charlotte inside today. Perhaps arrange for her tutors to come here instead of her attending school." Charlotte stepped forward before her mother could respond. "I'm going to school," she said quietly but firmly. Both adults turned to look at her. surprised by her sudden appearance and the determination in her voice. "Charlotte, darling," Catherine began gently, "perhaps it would be better to stay home today. Just to be safe," but Charlotte shook her head. "If I hide every time someone tries to frighten us, then they win. Great-grandmother never hid, did she? Even during the war, she stayed visible. She showed people that the royal family wouldn't be intimidated." Commander Davies looked uncomfortable. "Your Royal Highness, with respect, this is different. You're just a child, and our job is to protect you." "Your job is to keep me safe while I live my life," Charlotte replied, her words carrying a weight that seemed impossible for someone her age. "Not to keep me from living it at all." The conversation continued for several more minutes, but Charlotte had already made up her mind. She would attend school as planned, and she would face whatever waited outside with dignity. However, she also began forming a plan that none of the adults around her could have anticipated. During breakfast, Charlotte observed the increased security preparations with growing concern. She counted at least 12 additional officers positioning themselves throughout the palace and around the grounds. The atmosphere felt more like preparation for a military operation than a simple school run. As she ate her cereal, Charlotte noticed something that troubled her deeply. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly cook who had worked at the palace for 30 years, was being questioned by 2 security officers near the kitchen entrance. The kind woman who always saved Charlotte an extra biscuit looked frightened and confused as the officers checked her identification and searched her belongings. "That's not right," Charlotte murmured to herself, watching Mrs. Henderson's hand shake as she tried to explain why she had arrived earlier than usual. The officers were just doing their job, but Charlotte could see how their intense scrutiny was affecting someone who had been like family to the royal household for decades. After breakfast, Charlotte made an excuse about needing to retrieve a forgotten homework assignment from her room. Instead, she sought out James, her personal protection officer, who was reviewing security protocols in the main hallway. "James," she said, approaching him with the same serious expression she had worn the previous evening, "I need to ask you something important." James paused his conversation with another officer and gave Charlotte his full attention. "Of course, Your Royal Highness. What's on your mind? All these extra guards and security measures. They're making everyone nervous, not just the people outside." Mrs. Henderson looked ready to cry when those officers questioned her. "The gardener's assistant was turned away at the gate this morning even though he's worked here for 5 years. Are we protecting ourselves or are we creating fear?" James was struck by her observation. In all his years of security work, he had rarely considered how protection measures affected the innocent people who worked alongside the royal family daily. Charlotte's words made him realize that their increased vigilance was indeed creating an atmosphere of suspicion and anxiety that extended far beyond their intended targets. "You're very observant, Your Royal Highness," James said carefully. "Sometimes in our effort to keep you safe, we might create other problems." Charlotte nodded. "I've been thinking about that. And I've been thinking about what great-grandmother would do. She wouldn't just accept protection that hurt innocent people or made everyone around her afraid." As they spoke, another commotion arose near the main entrance. Charlotte could see through the windows that protesters had indeed gathered outside the palace gates, but they seemed peaceful, holding signs and chanting slogans she couldn't quite make out. What concerned her more was watching her own security team treat every visitor, every staff member and every delivery person as a potential threat. "James," Charlotte said, her voice taking on a tone of quiet resolve that would soon surprise everyone in the palace, "I think it's time for me to make a decision about how I want to be protected. And I think some people aren't going to like what I have to say." The young princess was about to take a stand that would challenge not just the security protocols surrounding her life, but the very way her family approached the balance between safety and freedom. What she didn't know was that her actions in the next few hours would be remembered and talked about for years to come, becoming a defining moment in her young life and a lesson for everyone around her. The tension in the palace reached its peak as Charlotte's departure time for school approached. Commander Davies had assembled what looked like a small army of security personnel in the main courtyard. The sight from Charlotte's bedroom window made her heart sink. Black SUVs surrounded by officers in tactical gear, creating a fortress-like atmosphere that transformed her home into something resembling a military compound. Charlotte watched from above as her regular driver, Thomas, was subjected to an extensive security check, despite having driven the royal family safely for over 8 years. She saw him remove his shoes, empty his pockets, and submit to a thorough search that left him looking humiliated and confused. This was a man who had taught her to tie her shoes properly and always remembered her favorite music for car rides. This has gone too far, Charlotte whispered to herself, her small hands pressed against the cool glass of the window. When Maria, her nanny, came to collect her for the journey to school, Charlotte was sitting calmly on her bed, still in her school uniform but with her shoes neatly placed beside her feet. She looked up with the expression that Maria had never seen before, determined yet peaceful, like someone who had made a difficult decision and found peace with it. "I'm not going," Charlotte announced simply. Maria blinked in surprise. "Not going to school, Your Royal Highness? Are you feeling unwell?" "I'm not going anywhere until the extra guards are sent away," Charlotte clarified, her voice steady and clear. "And I'm not putting my shoes on until Commander Davies agrees to treat our staff with respect." This was not the reaction Maria had expected. In all her years caring for Charlotte, she had never seen the princess take such a firm stand. "Perhaps we should discuss this with your parents." "Yes," Charlotte agreed. "Please ask them to come here. And please ask Commander Davies to come too. I have something to say to all of them." Word of Charlotte's refusal to cooperate spread quickly through the palace. Within minutes, Prince William and Princess Catherine were hurrying to their daughter's room, followed by a concerned Commander Davies and several other security officials. The small bedroom suddenly felt very crowded with adults who were all trying to understand what had caused their usually compliant princess to take such an unexpected stand. "Charlotte," William began gently, sitting on the edge of her bed, "we know this is all very overwhelming, but we need to get you to school safely." Charlotte looked directly at her father with eyes that seemed older than her 8 years. "Dad, do you remember the story you told me about great-grandmother during the London Blitz? How she and great-grandfather refused to leave London, even when Buckingham Palace was bombed?" William nodded, unsure where his daughter was heading with this reference. "You said she believed that the royal family should share the same risks as the people, and that hiding away would send the wrong message. You said she thought courage meant facing danger with dignity, not avoiding it entirely." Catherine exchanged a meaningful glance with her husband. Their daughter had clearly been thinking deeply about the family's legacy and her own role within it. Charlotte continued, her voice growing stronger. "Right now our guards are treating Mrs. Henderson like a criminal. Thomas had to take off his shoes like he's dangerous. The gardener's assistant couldn't even come to work. We're not sharing risks with people, we're making everyone around us suffer because we're afraid." Commander Davies stepped forward, his expression respectful but firm. "Your Royal Highness, these measures are necessary to ensure your safety. The threats we've received are serious." Charlotte stood up on her bed, giving her a few extra inches of height that somehow made her presence more commanding. "Commander Davies, I understand there are threats, but I also understand that the way we respond to threats says something about who we are. Are we people who protect ourselves by hurting others? Or are we people who find ways to be safe while still being kind?" The room fell silent. The adults looked at each other, then back at the small figure standing on the bed with such unexpected authority. Charlotte's question hung in the air, challenging everyone present to think beyond standard security protocols. "What are you suggesting, Charlotte?" Catherine asked softly, recognizing that her daughter had clearly thought this through carefully. "I'm suggesting that we find a different way," Charlotte replied. "I'll go to school today, but not with an army. I'll go with James and one other officer, the same as always. If people want to protest outside the palace, let them protest. If they're peaceful, they have that right. But we stop treating everyone who works here like they're dangerous." She paused, looking around the room at each adult face. "And if someone really wants to hurt us, hiding behind walls won't stop them forever. But showing that we're not afraid, that we trust the people around us, that we live our lives with dignity, that's how we really protect what matters." Commander Davies looked uncomfortable. "Your Royal Highness, I cannot recommend reducing security measures when we have credible threats." Charlotte climbed down from her bed and walked to where her shoes sat waiting. But instead of putting them on, she picked them up and held them in her hands like a symbol of her resolve. "Then I recommend that you think of better security measures," she said quietly, "because I won't be part of anything that makes innocent people afraid or treats good people badly. If that means I stay here today, then I stay here. But I won't put these shoes on and pretend that what's happening outside is acceptable." The standoff had begun, and Charlotte had drawn her line in the sand with quiet but unmistakable defiance. The palace had never experienced anything quite like this before. Word of Princess Charlotte's peaceful rebellion spread through the corridors like wildfire, creating an atmosphere of uncertainty that no security protocol had ever anticipated. Staff members whispered in corners, unsure whether to admire the young princess's courage or worry about the unprecedented situation unfolding. Commander Davies found himself in an impossible position. His duty was to protect the royal family, but he had never encountered a situation where a member of that family actively resisted protection on moral grounds. He stepped outside Charlotte's room to make urgent phone calls to his superiors, while William and Catherine remained with their daughter, trying to understand the full implications of her stand. "Charlotte," William said carefully, "you do realize that if you don't go to school today, there will be questions. The media will want to know why." Charlotte nodded thoughtfully. "Then we tell them the truth. We tell them that sometimes protecting someone means finding ways to keep them safe without hurting other people, and that I'm learning what it means to be responsible for the safety and happiness of everyone around me, not just myself." Her words carried a maturity that left both parents momentarily speechless. Catherine knelt down to her daughter's eye level. "Sweetheart, you're asking the security team to change procedures that are designed to keep you alive. That's a very big responsibility to take on." "I know, Mum," Charlotte replied, still holding her shoes. "But great-grandmother took on big responsibilities when she was young, too. She had to learn how to balance keeping people safe with keeping them happy. I think that's part of what it means to be royal. Not just being protected, but making sure protection doesn't become a prison for everyone else." Meanwhile, downstairs in the main security office, Commander Davies was engaged in heated discussions with his team. Several officers argued that giving in to a child's demands, no matter how noble her intentions, would set a dangerous precedent. Others, particularly those who had worked closely with the family for years, found themselves unexpectedly moved by Charlotte's concern for the palace staff. James, Charlotte's personal protection officer, found himself in the unique position of understanding both perspectives. He had witnessed Charlotte's genuine distress over how the enhanced security measures affected people she cared about, but he also knew the reality of the threats they faced. "Sir," James said to Commander Davies, "perhaps we could explore some middle ground. The princess isn't asking us to abandon security entirely. She's asking us to implement it more thoughtfully." "Thoughtfully?" Davies repeated, his voice tight with stress. "James, we have protocols for a reason. They're based on years of experience and expert analysis. But they're not based on the reality of living in this family," James replied quietly. "I've been protecting them for a decade. I've seen how these children struggle with the balance between safety and normalcy every day. Princess Charlotte isn't being rebellious. She's trying to find a way to live with dignity while still being protected." Back in Charlotte's room, the princess had moved to sit by her window, still holding her shoes and watching the activity in the courtyard below. She could see the protesters outside the palace gates, a small, peaceful group holding signs about various causes. They weren't threatening. They were simply exercising their right to be heard. "Look," she said to her parents, pointing toward the gates. "They're not scary people. They're just people who want to say something. And our guards are treating them like enemies while also treating Mrs. Henderson and Thomas like criminals. That doesn't make sense." William joined her at the window and studied the scene below. His daughter was right. The protesters appeared peaceful, and the heavy security response seemed disproportionate. More troubling was the sight of beloved staff members being subjected to searches and questioning that clearly distressed them. "What exactly would you like to see happen?" William asked his daughter. Charlotte turned from the window, her expression serious but hopeful. "I want Commander Davies to apologize to Mrs. Henderson and Thomas. I want the extra guards who are questioning our staff to be sent away. I want us to go to school the normal way with normal security, and I want everyone to understand that we're not afraid of people who want to express their opinions peacefully." "And if Commander Davies says no?" Catherine asked. Charlotte looked down at her shoes, then back up at her parents. "Then I stay here without shoes until he understands that protecting me shouldn't mean hurting other people. Sometimes the best way to stay safe is to show that you're not afraid." A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Commander Davies entered, looking exhausted and uncertain. Behind him stood James and several other senior security officers. The small bedroom was once again filled with adults, but this time the atmosphere felt different, less confrontational and more collaborative. Your Royal Highness, Commander Davies began formally, then stopped and seemed to reconsider his approach. Charlotte, he said more gently, I've been thinking about what you said. About how we protect you and how that affects other people. Charlotte sat up straighter, her attention focused completely on the commander's words. You're right that our current measures have created problems for staff members who have served your family faithfully for years. That wasn't our intention, but it is the result, and that matters. Davies paused, looking around the room before continuing. I'm willing to modify our approach, but I need you to understand that any compromise we make involves risk. Are you prepared to accept that responsibility? Charlotte stood up, still holding her shoes, and looked Commander Davies directly in the eye. I'm prepared to accept the responsibility of living my life in a way that doesn't hurt good people. And I'm prepared to trust that you can find ways to keep me safe while still treating everyone with kindness. The moment of truth had arrived, and everyone in the room knew that Charlotte's response to Davies's question would determine not just the events of this day, but potentially how the young princess would approach challenges for the rest of her life. Commander Davies studied Charlotte's determined face for a long moment before nodding slowly. Very well, Your Royal Highness. We'll try a different approach. He turned to his officers. Williams Chen, please escort the additional tactical team off the premises. We'll return to standard protection protocols. Charlotte's eyes brightened, but she remained standing with her shoes in hand. What about Mrs. Henderson and Thomas? Davies looked uncomfortable but resigned. I'll personally apologize to both of them for the excessive screening procedures. You're right that their years of faithful service should count for something. Thank you, Charlotte said simply, but she still didn't move to put on her shoes. James stepped forward. Is there something else, Your Royal Highness? Charlotte nodded toward the window. The protesters outside, they're going to think we changed our security because we're afraid of them. That sends the wrong message too. William raised an eyebrow. What message would you like to send? Charlotte walked to her desk and picked up a piece of paper and a pen. I'd like to send them a note, to let them know that we see them, that we respect their right to peaceful protest, and that we're not changing our routine because of fear. We're changing it because it's the right thing to do. The adults in the room exchanged glances. This was venturing into unprecedented territory. Royal family members, especially children, simply didn't communicate directly with protesters. Charlotte, Catherine said gently, that's not typically how these situations are handled. But maybe it should be, Charlotte replied, already writing carefully on the paper. Great-grandmother always said that clear communication prevents misunderstandings. If we don't explain why we're doing things differently, people will make up their own reasons. She finished writing and held up the note. In her neat handwriting it read, To the people outside our home, we see you and respect your right to speak peacefully. We want you to know that we are not afraid of your voices. We believe in listening to people, even when we might not agree. Thank you for being peaceful. Princess Charlotte. Commander Davies looked pale. Your Royal Highness, I cannot allow you to communicate directly with protesters. The security implications. Then you deliver it, Charlotte interrupted, surprising everyone with her quick thinking. You take the note to them. That way you can ensure it's done safely and they'll know it really came from me. The room fell silent again as everyone processed this unexpected solution. Charlotte had managed to address the commander's security concerns while still achieving her goal of direct communication. James spoke up quietly. It's actually not unprecedented for security personnel to serve as intermediaries in communication. And the note is respectful and appropriate. William looked at his daughter with a mixture of pride and amazement. You've really thought this through, haven't you? Charlotte nodded. I've been thinking about it all morning, about how every action we take sends a message to people, and how we want to make sure we're sending the right messages. Commander Davies took the note and read it again carefully. This is highly irregular, but I suppose there's nothing inappropriate in the content, and it might actually help de-escalate the situation outside. Will you do it? Charlotte asked. Davies looked around the room, seeing nods of encouragement from William and Catherine. Yes, Your Royal Highness. I'll deliver your note personally. Charlotte smiled for the first time that morning and sat down to put on her shoes. Thank you. And Commander Davies, when you apologize to Mrs. Henderson, please tell her that I noticed what happened and that I'm sorry it happened to her. As Charlotte laced up her shoes, the atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically. The tension that had dominated the morning was replaced by something that felt more like teamwork. The adults watched as the young princess prepared for school with a sense of dignity and purpose that transformed what had been a crisis into a moment of growth for everyone involved. Davies, left to carry out his commitments and sending away the extra security, apologizing to the staff members, and delivering Charlotte's note to the protesters. Meanwhile, Charlotte gathered her school books, chatting normally with her parents about her upcoming day. 20 minutes later, James appeared at her door with a small smile on his face. "Your Royal Highness, Commander Davies asked me to tell you that Mrs. Henderson said thank you for caring about her feelings. And Thomas said he's proud to drive for someone who stands up for what's right." Charlotte beamed. "And the people outside? They were surprised and very pleased to receive your note. Several of them said they'd never expected such direct acknowledgement from a member of the royal family. One woman said it made her feel heard." As they prepared to leave for school, Charlotte paused at her bedroom door and looked back at her parents. "I know I'm just 8 years old, and I know I don't understand everything about keeping people safe. But I do understand that how we treat people matters just as much as protecting ourselves." Catherine hugged her daughter tight. "You handled this with remarkable wisdom, sweetheart. I'm proud of how you stood up for what you believed in. And how you found solutions instead of just complaints," William added. "That's true leadership." As Charlotte walked toward the main entrance with James beside her, she felt different than she had that morning. She had faced a difficult situation, stood firm in her beliefs, but also listened to others and found compromises that worked for everyone. Most importantly, she had learned that quiet defiance, when combined with respect and thoughtfulness, could be more powerful than any amount of shouting or demanding. The protesters outside waved respectfully as her car passed, holding up Charlotte's note and smiling. Mrs. Henderson gave her an extra warm hug as she passed through the kitchen corridor. Thomas winked at her in the rear view mirror as they drove toward school. Charlotte had blocked the path of excessive security with nothing more than her quiet refusal to cooperate with something she believed was wrong. In doing so, she had learned something important about the kind of leader she wanted to become. The news of Charlotte's quiet rebellion spread far beyond the palace walls, though the full details remained private within the royal household. However, the changes in atmosphere were immediately noticeable to everyone who worked there. Staff members moved with less tension, security procedures became more respectful, and there was a sense that something important had shifted in how the royal family approached the balance between safety and dignity. At school that day, Charlotte's teacher, Miss Roberts, noticed something different about her young student. Charlotte participated in class discussions with a new confidence and seemed more thoughtful in her interactions with classmates. During lunch break, when a group of older students were teasing a younger child about his accent, Charlotte stepped in with the same quiet authority she had displayed that morning. "Emma," Charlotte said calmly to the lead teaser, "how do you think you would feel if people made fun of the way you spoke? And how do you think it makes James feel when you do that to him?" The older girl looked surprised to be challenged by someone younger. "It's just teasing, Charlotte. We're not being mean." "But James is crying," Charlotte pointed out gently, "so it doesn't matter what we call it. What matters is how it affects him. Maybe we should think of ways to make new students feel welcome, instead of ways to make them feel different." Miss Roberts, who had been approaching to intervene, stopped and watched, as Charlotte helped facilitate a conversation between the children that resulted in genuine apologies and an invitation for James to join their game. The teacher made a mental note to mention Charlotte's natural leadership abilities in her next report to the princess's parents. Back at the palace, the ripple effects of the morning's events continued to unfold. Mrs. Henderson had told other staff members about Princess Charlotte's concern for how they were being treated, and word spread that the young princess had actually stood up to security officials on their behalf. The loyalty and affection the staff felt for Charlotte deepened into something approaching reverence. Commander Davies, meanwhile, was conducting his own review of security protocols. Charlotte's challenge had forced him to examine procedures he had previously accepted without question. He realized that in his focus on physical safety, he had overlooked the psychological and emotional well-being of everyone within the palace environment. "James," Davies said during their afternoon briefing, "I want you to help me develop new guidelines for how we implement security measures. The princess was right that we need to find ways to protect the family without creating fear or suspicion among people who have earned our trust. James nodded thoughtfully. She has a point about dignity too, sir. When we treat longtime staff members like potential threats, we're not just hurting their feelings. We're undermining the relationships that actually make the family stronger and safer. That evening, Charlotte sat with her parents in the family's private sitting room, discussing the day's events. William and Catherine had spent considerable time talking about their daughter's actions and what they revealed about her character and potential future role. "Charlotte," William said, "I want you to know that what you did today was noticed by a lot of people. The way you stood up for others while still being respectful to everyone involved, that's exactly the kind of leadership our family needs." Charlotte looked up from her homework. "I just did what felt right, Dad. I couldn't put on my shoes and pretend that good people being treated badly was okay." Catherine smiled. "But you also listened to Commander Davies's concerns and found ways to compromise. That's a very mature approach to solving problems. Great-grandmother always said that the best solutions make everyone feel heard, even if not everyone gets everything they want," Charlotte replied. "I wanted the staff to be treated better, and Commander Davies wanted me to be safe. So we found a way to do both." Later that evening, Charlotte received an unexpected visitor. Her grandfather, King Charles, had heard about the day's events and came to speak with her personally. He found her in the library, reading a book about historical royal figures. "I hear you had quite an eventful day," he said, settling into the chair beside her. Charlotte marked her place in the book and looked at her grandfather seriously. "I hope I didn't cause too much trouble, Grandpa. I just couldn't go along with something that felt wrong." King Charles studied his granddaughter's earnest face. "Charlotte, do you know why I'm proud of what you did today?" She shook her head. "Because you demonstrated something that's very rare and very important. You showed moral courage. That means standing up for what's right even when it's difficult or uncomfortable. And you did it in a way that brought people together instead of driving them apart." Charlotte considered this. Was it really the right thing to do? Some people think I should just do what the security team says without questioning it. "Those people are wrong," Charles said firmly. "Our family's responsibility isn't just to be protected, it's to protect others. When you saw that good people were being hurt by policies that were supposed to protect you, you had a choice. You could ignore it or you could do something about it. You chose to act and you did it with wisdom and kindness." He paused, looking at the book in Charlotte's hands. "What are you reading?" Charlotte held up the book. "Stories about Queen Elizabeth and how she handled difficult situations. I wanted to understand how other queens made hard decisions." King Charles smiled. "And what have you learned?" "That sometimes the best way to show strength is to admit when something isn't working and be willing to change it. And that good leaders listen to people who are affected by their decisions, not just people who tell them what they want to hear." "Those are very wise conclusions," Charles said. "I think your great-grandmother would be very proud of how you handled today. You showed that you understand something crucial about leadership. It's not about having power over people. It's about using whatever influence you have to make life better for others." As Charlotte prepared for bed that night, she reflected on all the conversations and events of the day. She had learned that standing up for her beliefs was possible, but it required thoughtfulness, respect for others, and a willingness to listen and compromise. Most importantly, she had discovered that even as a young princess, her voice and actions could make a real difference in the lives of people around her. The quiet defiance that had begun with her refusal to put on her shoes had grown into something much larger, a new understanding of what it meant to be royal in the modern world, where true nobility came not from commanding obedience, but from earning respect through principled action and genuine care for others. 3 months later, the changes that began with Charlotte's quiet rebellion had transformed not just the security protocols at the palace, but the entire approach to royal protection across the monarchy. Commander Davies had been invited to present the new dignity-centered security model to other royal households, and several international protection agencies had requested information about their innovative approaches. The success of the new protocols was measured not just in maintained safety, but in improved staff morale, better relationships between the royal family and their support teams, and a notable decrease in security incidents. When people felt trusted and respected, they became natural allies in protection efforts rather than reluctant subjects of suspicion. Charlotte had settled into her new role as an unofficial advocate for thoughtful change within the palace. Staff members began approaching her with concerns they might have previously kept to themselves, knowing that she would listen and, when appropriate, find ways to address issues constructively. She had learned to distinguish between problems she could help solve and those that required adult intervention, but her willingness to listen had created a network of communication that strengthened the entire palace community. The most significant test of the new approach came during a state visit from the President of France. Traditional security protocols would have involved extensive lockdowns, multiple screening checkpoints, and severe restrictions on staff movement. Instead, Charlotte's influence had helped develop a more collaborative approach where longtime staff members were treated as valuable security assets rather than potential threats. On the morning of the visit, Charlotte found Mrs. Henderson in the kitchen, directing preparations for the state dinner with her usual efficiency, but noticeably less stress than such events had previously caused. "Mrs. Henderson," Charlotte said, "you seem much happier during this visit than during the last one." The elderly cook smiled warmly. "Oh, Your Royal Highness, it's like night and day. Instead of treating us like we might poison the guests, the security team actually asked for our help in making sure everything goes smoothly. They trust us to do our jobs well, and that makes all the difference." Charlotte nodded, remembering how different things had been just a few months earlier. "Do you feel like you can keep everyone safe while still feeling respected?" "Absolutely," Mrs. Henderson replied. "When people trust you, you want to prove that trust is well placed. When they suspect you, you just feel angry and resentful. The new way makes everyone work better together." During the state visit itself, Charlotte had the opportunity to observe how the new security protocols worked in practice. The French president's own security team noticed the relaxed but vigilant atmosphere at the palace and commented favorably on how the British approach seemed to achieve excellent protection while maintaining a welcoming environment. At the state dinner, Charlotte was seated with other young people, but she found herself watching the interactions between the security teams and palace staff. She saw James quietly coordinating with Mrs. Henderson to ensure smooth service, while other officers worked seamlessly with the household staff to maintain both safety and dignity throughout the evening. After the successful visit, King Charles invited Charlotte to join him in his study for their regular evening conversations, which had become a treasured tradition since the morning of her quiet rebellion. "You know, Charlotte," her grandfather said, settling into his favorite chair, "the French president specifically mentioned how impressed he was with our security arrangements. He said they managed to be both thorough and gracious, which he hadn't experienced before." Charlotte looked up from the book she was reading about modern diplomacy. "Do you think what I did that morning really made a difference, Grandpa?" "I think," Charles said carefully, "that you demonstrated something very important about leadership. You showed that questioning established ways of doing things isn't disrespectful if it's done thoughtfully and with good intentions. You proved that even young people can have insights that adults miss." He paused, looking at his granddaughter with evident pride. "But more than that, you showed that real strength sometimes means being willing to say this isn't right even when everyone expects you to just go along with, things." Charlotte closed her book and gave her grandfather her full attention. "I've been thinking about that morning a lot, about how scared I was to challenge Commander Davies, but how I felt even worse about staying quiet when I saw good people being hurt. That conflict you felt between wanting to be obedient and wanting to do what's right, that's something every leader faces," Charles explained. "The difference between good leaders and great ones is that great leaders choose doing right over being comfortable." 6 months after the incident, Charlotte received a letter that surprised and delighted her. It was from a young girl in Canada whose parents worked in government security. The girl had heard about Charlotte's stand for treating people with dignity and had been inspired to speak up when she saw bullying at her own school. "Dear Princess Charlotte," the letter read, "my mom told me about how you stood up for people who work at your palace. It made me brave enough to tell my teacher when older kids were being mean to new students. Thank you for showing me that kids can make things better too." Charlotte shared the letter with her parents during dinner that evening. William and Catherine exchanged meaningful glances as they read about their daughter's unexpected influence on a child thousands of miles away. "How does it feel to know that your actions inspired someone else to be brave?" Catherine asked. Charlotte considered the question seriously. It feels wonderful, but also a bit scary. It makes me realize that what I do really matters, even when I think nobody is watching. That's exactly right, William said, and that understanding will serve you well throughout your life. Every choice you make, every stand you take, has the potential to influence others. That night, as Charlotte prepared for bed, she looked at the shoes she had refused to put on that transformative morning, now sitting neatly in her closet. They had become a symbol to her of the power of quiet defiance, the strength that came from refusing to participate in something wrong, even when that refusal was inconvenient or uncomfortable. She had learned that blocking someone's path didn't require aggression or anger. Sometimes the most powerful form of resistance was simply standing still, staying true to your principles and refusing to move until the right thing was done. Her quiet defiance had not only changed security protocols at the palace, it had taught everyone around her that wisdom and courage could come from the most unexpected sources. As she fell asleep, Charlotte smiled, knowing that she had found her own way to honor her family's legacy of service while staying true to her own values. She had learned that being royal wasn't about having people serve you. It was about using whatever influence you had to serve others, especially those who had no voice of their own. The guard had indeed been ordered to leave, but Princess Charlotte had blocked their path not with force or demands, but with the quiet power of a young person who refused to compromise her principles. In doing so, she had discovered that sometimes the smallest acts of defiance could create the biggest changes of all.